What's up, my friends? It's Camiel Daamen, your online Ableton certified trainer. And today we're going to talk about one-shots and all the ways to use one-shots in your productions. This might be a little bit for beginners, but it could also be interesting for intermediate and advanced because I'm going to show all the ways to use one-shots. So we can use one-shots, obviously, as we know, on audio channels, or we can also use them on MIDI channels. So if we use them in a drum rack, a drum sampler, a sampler, or a simpler. So there's many ways of deploying them, right? So what are one-shots? Well, we have, obviously when we buy a sample pack, we get like loops like this, for instance, a kick loop, which we can drag in, and that's a kick loop. But if we have a one-shot, so let's say we go to the one-shot pack here, go to the drums, find a kick. Let's take this first one. We can also drag in a kick, only this is a little bit, you have to go in and, boom, boom, boom. Let me turn that down a little bit. We can copy this bit, duplicate this, and that way we also create a kick loop, right? So we can consolidate this. This is usually the way. If you want to consolidate something, you right click your selection, you click consolidate, then it will make it into one big clip. And then you can copy it as well. That's how you can make your own loops from using one-shots. That's one way. If we want to use the one-shot the other way, we could take a MIDI track, and there's two ways for this to do this. We can either, so let's say we don't have this kick, right? So if we want to have, by the way, if we want to transpose the kick, let's go back one more. When it transpose the kick, we have to go inside of the clip and go to the pitch. Right? So we can transpose like this to play different notes. But, if you use, let's say, a bass one-shot, it's going to be tough to, make this shorter and make like a bass sort of like, this is going to be, tough to play. I would prefer to have this as MIDI. So let's say we're going to take this. That's a nice bass, actually. Take that. We're going to use that later to make music with this, right? So whenever you have audio one-shots, you can drag them in and change the pitch that way. But the best thing, I think, is to use them as MIDI. So there's two ways of doing that, as I said, right? If we go to our instruments, you'll find here, for drums, we can use either the drum rack or the drum sampler. These are the empty drum rack. If I use a drum rack and I would drag in like the kick. So let's say I'm here, my lessons in live. I go to the drums, I take the kick, and boom. I can put one in, or I can make my own kits and put like a few in, And there's all these kicks here. And then if I want, I can go to the classic mode and just change the attack the cases, then release if I want to make it a little shorter. For instance, let's see if we have a long one. They're all pretty. Ooh. Let's say we want to make this shorter. You go, boom, take the release back, take the sustain back, and now, right? You can make it as short as you want using the attack decay, sustain, release. So basically, using a one-shot inside of a drum rack is really cool. And it basically is a simpler that is within each pad of the drum rack. You can also change that to a sampler, drum sampler here. If you right click on the simpler, you can take it into a drum sampler where you have a bunch of other options. So what is a drum sampler? Well, let's have a look. Then we go to our instruments and you see drum sampler, and we drag that to a MIDI channel. Now we have an empty drum sampler which can hold a sample. It's also cool to not just use it for drums, because there's a lot of effects here on the side. Check out my drum sampler tutorial for this. But this is also really cool, and you can drag your one-shots in there. So let's say I want to have a hi-hat, for instance. I can drag in a hi-hat. Boom, there it is. But the cool thing is, once you have it as MIDI, like in a drum sampler, if I now create a MIDI clip here, I turn on the alien, you can pitch it, you can play it a little lower or higher. If you have it in a drum rack, for instance, so if we take our drum rack in the other channel here, if I would drag that same hi-hat inside here, the only way to transpose it is to transpose it here in the options of the drum rack. If you're in classic mode, so in one shot it's here. In classic mode, it's always under controls. It's always under controls, but in one shot mode you don't see it. You see it in the classic mode, you don't see it in the front panel. So if you're here in your classic mode, you don't see transpose. You have to go inside of controls. In one shot or slice mode, go to controls. All right, that's how to transpose the sounds there. But if you load it into a drum sampler, you can still transpose it. That's just transposing the original sound, but it also works just to go down. Right, then you can play it, have it to go down, right? That's really cool. And that's also with other sounds. You can do that with like a bass sound. So if we drag that bass onto here, we can decay it. Let's take this guy out. Right, you can change the attack. So also drum sample is cool for this, but it's a drum sampler. Right, you can also just use it. It's not, I don't think it's per se a drum sampler. You can use the drum sampler also for one shots of vocals or one shots of bass. It's super cool, right? So this is another way to use one shots, and one shots in a sampler, in a simpler. One shots in a drum rack, one shot in a drum sampler, all really cool. The one shot in the simpler and sampler is the same as you have in a drum rack, but there's just no drum rack. So if I would load this bass here inside of this simpler, this means that I can actually play it now. And it's on one shot. So you see, when I press one note once, it plays the whole note. If I do classic, it depends on how I set the attack, decay, sustain, and release. If the release is 60 seconds, obviously it's like one shot. If I make it short, then I can just play it. Take the attack a little bit open. That's super cool. And usually when you play the C3, this is the original sample. If you go C4, you're an octave higher. And this is pretty cool because you can use the controls as you have in, for instance, in drum rack with a kick. In this, you have a bass, but you can play the bass in different notes. Also with vocals, you can play the vocals in different pitches, which is cool. They used to do that a lot in the 90s when they had the samplers. They would house. They would go up, and like with the vocals, you probably know the sound when you hear it. So that's how to use one shots in a simpler. In a sampler, we have a little bit more options, right? Sampler is basically the same as a simpler. It's a sampler, but you have lots more options. You can add. You have oscillators in there. You could check out a little bit on how the sampler works to add oscillators. You can do so much more. You can build whole stacks of sounds on different keys, whatever. You can do a lot. But basically, to keep this simple, it's just that when you load it up, it's the same. You have your bass, and you can play it on as if it's a MIDI. So usually when people do my beginner's course and you learn, this is audio, you can use audio on audio tracks, but then you transpose it here. Now, well, if you load a sample inside of a simpler or a sampler or a drum sampler for that matter, you can play the note from low to high, and that gives you a lot more options to play and to use the sounds that you have inside of any pack that you might get. If you buy a new pack, sometimes you get a pack and there's a lot of one shots in there. Even if it's a loop, you can just isolate one part of the loop. So you just take that one shot from the loop, put it in one of the simpler or the sampler, and then play it like a sound. This is really, really cool. So these are the ways to use sounds, right? You can use one shots by dragging them onto audio channels, but you're limited. You can't really play. If you, for instance, want to make like a little a little bass line with this. It's hard, better you drag those one shots inside of a sampler or a simpler or a drum sampler. And for kicks, if you put like kicks in a drum rack, you can load many sounds in here. Look at all the sounds you can drag into like a drum rack. If you fill this up, if you let's go to the Lessons in Live pack and say, I want to make a whole shaker rack. I can have all these shakers in here, rename this, call this shaker rack, and then I save this with the save button, and it takes me to my user library, instruments, drum rack, and there I have all my racks. This is super cool, right? All right, so let me delete those guys. Boom. So let me tell you, to summarize, the one-shots are super cool. Use your one-shots in simpler samplers and drum samplers, and use your drums inside of drum racks and play the MIDI. Otherwise, just have fun using your one-shots inside of your arrangement view. But remember, when you have like a whole bunch, you can select some time, press Command J from join or consolidate, and you make them to bigger loops. That's the session for today. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you like the way that I teach. If you like it, check out my courses in January. I've got the beginners, intermediate, and advanced starting. If you register before the 1st of December, you get discount. You get 200 euros discount on the beginners and the advanced, and I believe 100 euros discount on the intermediate. I do private lessons as well. I have a producer community called the Lessons in Live DOJO on Patreon, patreon.com/lessonslive. Find me for questions. Find me for suggestions for new tutorials, and enjoy making music, and I'll see you at the next one.